Hello, it's David here again. Hope you're doing okay at the moment with the restrictions continuing, and this is me just continuing with my sort of weekly little message, just sort of random things that I'm thinking about. And I want to start this morning because I'm going to talk about the fact that Thursday is Corpus Christi. Literally, that's just the Latin words for the body of Christ. And it's particularly a time when we give thanks for the sacrament of Holy Communion or the Eucharist or the Mass or whatever you call it, and Jesus instituting that at the Last Supper. So my best man, I was also his best man. We actually got married about, I think, a month apart or so, many years ago. And he's a mathematician and a slightly more successful one than me. He is a professor of applied mathematics, fluid dynamics at Bristol University. I quite often stay with him when I go and visit my father or my parents, as it was. And obviously, at that sort of level, you get involved in big questions. So I don't know if you remember when there was the ash cloud and we couldn't fly lots of planes because of the volcano. I think it was in Iceland, and because of his expertise, he was involved in, being asked about that by the government and the mathematical modelling behind it. Also, the some of the flooding on the Somerset levels. He was involved at that at the highest level. So one evening after visiting my parents, I went round there, and his lovely, charming Italian wife had gone out, or was just going out, and she said, "I've left you some food." So we said, "Well, that's lovely." So there's the chickpeas just in the pressure cooker there that you can cook. So Andrew said, "Well, do you want a beer before we do that?" I said, "It'd be nice to have a beer." And then after a while, stomach was rumbling, and Andrew said, "But would you like another beer?" And I thought, well, yeah, I quite like some food as well. And then he said, "Well, let's get some food." Oh, good. He said, "Do you want to just do the chickpeas?" And I said, "Well, you do the chickpeas. I'll go and get some of the other stuff ready." He said, No, you do the chickpeas." And I said, "Andrew, you're a professor of fluid dynamics. Yeah. You don't know how to use a pressure cooker, do you?" And I, no idea. And I said, "Well, neither do I. And actually, I have terrible memories of them as a child exploding." So really, we sort of carried on drinking beer, and we never really cooked the chickpeas. And his wife came home and sort of looked at both of us and said, "How many PhDs does it need to cook some chickpeas?" Pointing at me and saying, "Well, your qualifications are useless, but you," pointing to her husband, "you have just told airlines that they can fly." And that seems more worrying. Now, of course, that's because, it's the difference between theory and practice, isn't it? That he, and I think me as well, we're pretty good at some of the theory stuff, but we're not so good with our hands at practicing stuff. And people are different. People have different skills. Look behind me, you see my bicycles. I daren't touch them apart from mending a puncture because they're quite expensive, and I would just damage them somehow, get it wrong. If ever there's a wrong way to put a flat pack together, I will discover it in the process. I'm just not terribly practical or good with things. But what I do know is that when I have to do stuff, so you have to learn to sort of fix punctures, and of course you've got to do various tasks around the house at some point. You've got to build flat pack furniture at some point in your life. Of course, the first time is always the worst. And as you do it more, you do get better. You learn the tricks, you learn how it's done. You don't have to keep looking at the instructions. And if you keep doing something, you get a bit sort of muscle memory of just remembering how to do things, and it becomes much easier than when you started. I want to just think of those things in terms of religion, because religion involves all of us, our whole being. And it involves believing things. Quite often we think that's the core of religion is, I believe. And when we stand up and say the creed, it is about what we believe, which we think is a kind of intellectual theory head thing. But it also involves in doing stuff. I mean, Christianity particularly, and others, are very practical religions. There are things you have to do, not just rituals and worship, but actually, things like social action require action. You have to go and do things to be a Christian. And of course, also it involves our feelings. We feel a certain way about our faith, about the people we love, about the world around us, and that involves our feelings. And I suppose the key really is getting those three things in balance for us as Christians. But dare I suggest it, the Christians have been very sort of keen on perhaps believing. Particularly Protestant Christians who've read the Bible and thought about it, and we've hammered out the creed over those early centuries of the church. And it can become a bit of a sort of intellectual exercise. It's probably, if we were to sort of teach Christianity in schools, we might call the book, what do Christians believe? That would be the first question. More and more these days, we're asked in all sorts of things in life also about, well, how do you feel about that? If we look at sort of advertising on the television and chat shows and things, very often the conversation is about not just what we believe about something, but how do we feel about something? How does it make us feel? I think probably if you asked most Jews, they would have a slightly different take on it. Of course, they vary just as much as Christians. But one of the first questions Jews are asked often about their faith is not what do you believe or do you believe, but are you practicing? In other words, do you do the rituals that your faith demands? Do you attend synagogue or shul? Do you keep the Friday night meals? Do you keep kosher food in your house? And so the first question, therefore, is about observance. And therefore, that kind of leads on then to questions about belief and faith. Why do you do these things? I think Christians, because they look back on Jesus, who rightly, as the Jewish prophets were, was very suspicious of observance, sort of an empty observance, just doing something because that's what you'd always done without kind of the right thoughts and feelings behind us. We get a bit worried about observance, and quite rightly. I mean, there's no point sort of just keeping up the outward rituals if it's not a matter of the heart and of the mind as well. That's where the balance comes in. But I think it's a bit more involved, dare I say, a bit more tricky than that, because actually a bit like me getting on with those sort of practical tasks that I don't like doing, or fixing a puncture or building flat packs or whatever, is actually, of course, by doing something, we're able to kind of then know more about it, know more about the theory of it, to know it intellectually, and maybe even get to enjoy it and feel good and capable doing it, which we didn't feel at first. So doing something becomes very much linked to what we think about it, what we believe about it, and what we feel about it. And very much, particularly Jewish people, say, well, you have to practice in order to believe. Now, we tend to think the other way around as Christians, that, I believe, I've come to this belief, therefore I'm going to practice. I think Jewish people would often come at it the other way around and say, well, if you practice and if you keep going, you will come to believe. And prayer's a bit like that. I mean, sometimes people sort of, don't feel like praying, or it just seems God isn't there, and they kind of give up and they lose the habit, and they say, well, I just didn't feel like it, and I got to have a habit, and now I never pray. And I think sometimes Christians can learn from others there and need to just say, well, actually, there are times it's going to be like that. It's going to be going through the motions. It's going to be routine. It's going to be something because I've always done it. But actually, then it will come back. Then the belief and the feelings will come back, and then maybe they'll disappear again. And spiritual writers have written a lot about this. I don't kind of need to go into that. But that feeling that actually sometimes we just need to do stuff, and then the kind of belief and the feelings follow, and not necessarily the other way round. You might think, what has all this got to do with what I talked about at the beginning, Corpus Christi and Holy Communion? Well, as I say, although Jesus and many of the Jewish prophets were very suspicious of empty observance, nonetheless, they thought it was important that you did things. And so Jesus at the Last Supper, this is the big moment. He's, sharing the Last Supper with his friends. This is it, the last sort of will and testament. We've got that sort of long discourse in John's Gospel. And he does say other things as well. Love one another as I have loved you. For instance, the great commandment from which we get the word Maunday to command, Maunday Thursday. But when it comes to the institution of Holy Communion, that really very special moment, that kind of legacy moment, I suppose you call it these days, Jesus says, do this. Do this in remembrance of me. In the end, his command to them isn't, I hope you will believe this after I've gone, or please, remember how you felt, and I hope you always feel as, as holy or as good, as joyful as you do now. There's none of that. What he says is, do this in remembrance of me. And I think that's important, that we take bread and wine, we take physical things, and through those physical things, by practicing, by being observant Christians. Sometimes it's that practicing and the observation that kind of continues and carries us through, and the kind of belief and the feelings will sometimes be a bit up and down. I think it probably is for lots of us, but that's okay. That's part of it. And particularly at this time when, a lot of the observance we can't do. But yet we do what we can, and sometimes it will feel a bit arid and a bit dry. But as far as we keep on going, knowing that God is faithful and that he will be with us, and we keep on doing things. And so that's what I want us to remember this week as we think of the Eucharist and give thanks for Holy Communion being given to us, that special intimate moment. But just remembering those commands of Jesus, do this in remembrance of me. Thank you.